2025, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, a significant number of armed police officers stepped down from their duty today after one of their colleagues was charged with murder. Now, let's remember, these guys make split-second decisions. So I'm wondering tonight, do you think there is enough protection within the law for them? Would you ever volunteer to carry a firearm around with you if you were a police officer? And by now, play later. What do you think to this? Is this exploitation of the poor or an essential service? The Labour Party want to see much more regulation of the sector. Do you agree with that? And Lampedusa, do you even know where that is? It is an Italian island with a population of about 6,000. Well, they have seen that population pretty much double because double that number of people arrived in small boats in just a few days. What is going on? But crucially, how on earth does it affect us all here in the UK? Is mass population shift now the future or not? And inheritance tax, there is more talk about this. Again, yes, of course, about it being scrapped. Should it be? You tell me. We've got it all to come and more. But before we get into it, let's grab tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you. The top story tonight is that the Metropolitan Police has launched an investigation after receiving a number of sex offence allegations against Russell Brand. The force says the cases are not recent and no arrests have been made. It follows an investigation by Channel 4's Dispatches programme and the Times and Sunday Times. The comedian denies the accusations against him made by 4 women. As you've been hearing, the Army, which was on standby to help the Metropolitan Police, has been stood down. It's after a significant number of counter-terrorism firearm officers stepped back from their duties after a colleague was charged with murder over the shooting of Chris Cubber in South London last year. The force says enough officers have now returned to armed duties to meet its counter-terrorism responsibilities without military help. Law and Order Foundation Director Norman Brennan says the criminal justice system is broken.
I'm not talking about this case. Let me tell you why I think some police officers are charged. It's not because there's good evidence against them. It's often because there is a certain outcry in our communities, and what the Independent Office of Police Corruption do and the Crown Prosecution Service, they dare not FA it if it's not sufficient evidence. What they do is they allow it to a jury. And do you know why they do that? and I say this with the utmost respect and experience, 45 years of law and order, is because they fear public disorder on the streets.
London Gatwick has introduced a temporary limit on flights to prevent delays and cancellations after an outbreak of coronavirus amongst air traffic control staff. There'll be a limit of 800 flights a day, which includes both departure and arrival flights. The restrictions will remain in place until Sunday, the 1st of October. That's after 30% of NATS Tower staff are currently unavailable due to medical reasons, including COVID. The Greater Manchester Mayor has said today the North shouldn't have to pay for the government's mismanagement of HS2. Rishi Sunak is refusing to guarantee that the Manchester leg of the line will be completed, with a decision expected to be announced before the Tory party conference next week. But Andy Burnham says curtailing the project represents the opposite of levelling up. The Prime Minister, however, insists he's committed to the long-term Tory pledge.
This kind of speculation that people are, making is not right. I mean, we've got spades in the ground, we're getting on and delivering, but across the north, what we're also doing is connecting up all the towns and cities in the north, east to west. That's a really important part of how we will create jobs, drive growth across the region, all part of our plans to level up. Free ports are another good example of that, whether that's in Teesside or elsewhere, attracting new investment, new businesses coming in, all good examples of the government levelling up.
The Home Secretary is calling for unity among Western leaders to combat the global migration crisis. She's visiting the United States, and Suella Braverman will tell an audience in Washington that other countries may be able to learn from the UK's innovative attempts to tackle illegal migrants. She's questioning whether legal frameworks designed more than 50 years ago are still fit for purpose. The Home Secretary has expressed her personal desire to leave the European Court of Human Rights, which she holds responsible for the failure of the Rwanda scheme. 1 million NHS appointments have had to be cancelled since December because of strikes in England. Last week's industrial action by junior doctors and consultants meant the country has reached the milestone in figures set to be announced today. Another double strike is scheduled for next week. The organisation's Deputy Chief Executive, Saffron Caudry, has labelled it damaging and demoralising. The serial killer, Lucy Letby, is facing a retrial on the attempted murder of a baby girl known only as Child K. The former nurse was jailed for life for murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill 6 others at a hospital in Chester between 2015 and 2016. Jurors were unable to reach a verdict on 6 further counts of attempted murder. A provisional date has been set for June next year. Experts are warning the government won't meet its manifesto pledge to end homelessness by next year. The Kerslake Commission says there are chronic and unresolved issues in the housing system, with a crisis pushing more people on the streets. The number of people sleeping rough last autumn was 25% higher than the same period 3 years ago. The government, though, says it is spending £2 billion to end rough sleeping for good. And finally, a space capsule carrying soil from the surface of an asteroid has been recovered by NASA. The sample was collected by the OSIRIS-REx spacecraft before making the 1.2 billion-mile journey to be parachuted through the Earth's atmosphere and landing in the desert in Utah in the United States. Scientists are hoping it'll shed light on the formation of the solar system and the origin of life on Earth itself. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, the PR consultant Alex Dean and the former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. Good evening, gents. Couldn't help but notice that HS2 story there in the headlines. We discussed this at length a few days ago on this programme, but I'm really interested about this Northern thing. There's a lot of criticism aimed at the Tories, saying they don't care about the Northerners, do they?
Well, I don't think that can be true. Apart from anything else, if you just look at it from naked self-interest, without the North, the Conservative Party doesn't have a majority in the House of Commons. My fear with HS2 is that the more you salami slice it, even if you're trying to realise benefits that you claim are to be had, the less utility you get from what's left of it.
James?
It was fundamentally badly conceived. They should have started it from the north coming down. That's where the transport connections are less good, and maybe even started with the Liverpool to Hull line connecting up the north first before making it a bit faster to go from London to Birmingham, where it's already quick.
See, common sense at last. There'll be a lot of northerners out there agreeing with you. A lot of people, they don't speak sense on HS2, do they? A lot of people as well, very confused about what HS2 even is these days, because what it began life as versus where it is or perhaps isn't today, it's vastly different, isn't it? Let me know your thoughts on HS2. Are you a northerner? Do you actually agree with the concepts of scrapping it all? Do you think that they do care about you? And that whole point that James made there was a good one. If you are so passionate about the north, why not begin all the construction, all the rest of it, from the north downwards? I don't know, you tell me. On this programme, it is not just about us three, you know the drill. It is about you guys at home. What's on your mind tonight? I've got a lot coming your way. I want to talk to you about buy now, pay later. Also, inheritance tax, police officers being armed. Would you want to be armed walking the streets of London or beyond? And lots more coming your way. So get in touch all the usual ways, gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet me at gbnews. Paul, you are one of my first emails tonight, a little ditty. Dewbs and Co, what a show. On the telly, just her head, no belly. She's on the ball, she knows it all. Just watch the show and you will know. I like it. I'm very pleased you don't see my belly. I'd have to spend the whole time breathing in anyway. Right, let's get stuck in. One of the topics that have got you guys talking tonight is this armed police situation, because you might have heard today that a number of armed officers, in fact, at one point, I think it was all but about 5 people that were on annual leave or something were the conversation as it was. Anyway, they were basically handing in their tickets, their guns, for want of a better word, and the armed forces, apparently, were going to be on standby. Anyway, it's all kind of calmed down a little bit now. It all stemmed from the charges that's been levied against one officer for the case of Chris Cabber. I can't really get into the specifics of that case for legal reasons, because it's an ongoing case. But on the more broader question about our armed officers, getting enough protection within the law, you are a barrister. Where do you stand on it?
Your viewers won't like this. You do need some oversight over those who are equipped with weaponry that can deliver lethal outcomes on the streets of Britain. Now, we are asking these people in high-pressure environments to take split-second decisions. So I'm very sympathetic to the people put in that situation, and indeed the persecution of people in a rather different context, but out of Bloody Sunday, again and again and again, I think has been completely wrong. But you can't have no investigation and you can't have no accountability. We've had 33 fatal shootings in London since 1990, one a year. And that's actually a very, very low rate for a city of this kind of size. 4 prosecutions have resulted and no convictions. That seems to me to be a system that's basically working.
Do you agree with that?
Broadly, yes. I think Alex is right that high levels of scrutiny are placed on people who have weapons, and it's right that they do, because the police are meant to be having essentially the same powers as civilians, but they're outsourced because they're doing it all of the time. That's the principle that we're meant to have of policing by consent. So if you have powers like the power to kill because you have a gun, that requires this extra scrutiny. And I can understand, I think it's 100 out of the 3,000 firearm officers responded to one of their colleagues being on trial for the murder of Chris Cabber last year. And I can understand how 100 people would feel emotionally very strongly about that and would want to support their colleague. That doesn't mean that it's wrong that police officer is prosecuted. And of course, we don't know any of the actual details in the case, so we can't say. But it doesn't mean in any way that it's because they've taken that decision that they feel, you know, they've responded strongly to that. It doesn't mean that doing so was wrong. And there are still, you know, plenty of armed Met officers who are there. The one thing where I would slightly quibble with Alex, Alex saying it's basically all working. Maybe it's working, but I think from the things that we've seen over the last few years about how things are operating within the Met, within the culture of the Met and policing, I think there's probably scope for review of how this operates as well. So I wouldn't say everything is working fine, but broadly, yeah, I agree.
You'll forgive me, I certainly don't think everything's working fine. Some people will expect somebody on the right like me to automatically be on the side of the police, but that's not the case. The investigation into Daniel Morgan, the journalist who was murdered, axe in his head in a car park, the last investigation of 5 into the Met's conduct found that the Met was institutionally corrupt. Well, I wouldn't maintain everything was fine given that. And of the prosecutions that have been brought against officers shooting dead members of the public on the streets of London, one was, of course, into the case of Jean-Charles de Menendez. Now, I may well not think the officer directly responsible for that death was criminally culpable to the point of being convicted of murder, but given that the police misled the public about what Jimenez had done on the way in, I'm not claiming everything was right about that
In case
either.
you're not familiar, that is the one, I think it was at Stockwell Tube, and I think was he a Brazilian electrician?
It was Brazilian, and it was a case of mistaken identity.
And they said that he jumped the barriers, but he didn't. No, he didn't. He had
completely untrue.
Not. And you do see that quite often in high-profile incidents where there's some kind of confrontation of some sort between the public and the police. There's a big asymmetry in information, because if the police put out some press information, therefore, that will get reported.
Exactly. And years later, people still think he jumped the barriers when he did no such thing.
When you said, your opening line, you said, the viewers of this programme weren't like what I have to say. Why would you assume that?
Because I think that people expect us to rally in situations like this to the side of those who are understandably, they want us to rally to the side of those entrusted with this grave duty. But my point is, you can't just give people carte blanche to be police with weapons like this on the streets of London. And indeed, let's view it in another context. This man has been convicted of nothing. Let's agree with that.
Yeah.
A teacher accused of misconduct or a doctor accused of misconduct. If all their nurses and colleagues, if their teachers and colleagues came out on strike in sympathy, we might think, well, hang on, what about the patients? What about the students? I think there are two sides to this, and rather than everyone withdrawing their labour and getting my full-throated support, we should examine it logically.
Well, the inbox,
and that's why I look to see whether the system is working or not.
The inbox is actually pretty divided. So Andy says, if it was your brother or father or son that was shot in error by an armed police officer, surely anyone would want it fully investigated and then someone criminally charged if indeed they were found to be negligent. Pat said the police are not above the law, and they need to remember that very important fact. He says, or she says, there is so much corruption, it is essential that there is justice for all. John says, Michelle, the police can be trained forever and a day, basically, but facing the real thing is a complete different matter. Human nature and self-preservation takes over all the training in the land. He says he served 28 years military experience, and he speaks with experience. Graham says police have to make these split-second decisions, should not have to worry about facing prosecution if something goes wrong. Michael says, Michelle, you asked, would we like to see more armed police? Quite frankly, I would like to see any policeman on the street, never mind an armed one. Do you think all police officers should be armed, perhaps, say, for example, not with a gun, but maybe with a taser?
No, I don't think so. I think we want to have policing to be as close to the community as possible, as much of policing to be as close to the community as possible.
Would you go into certain, like, rough communities and all the rest of it if you weren't armed to protect yourself as a police officer?
I mean, it depends on the circumstances, but yes. But, I mean, also, we should turn this around, right? We need to have policing by consent. You store up very big problems if you don't have policing by consent. So that's why I think there needs to be much more community-level engagement and oversight over to how policing is done. Because if policing is done like an occupying force, where you have to be armed, where there's necessarily a confrontation just by your presence, then the system is really not working.
I agree with a good deal of that, not least because we've stopped policing proactively, having officers on the street where they can be seen, and we've started policing like we put out fires, waiting until the problem arises and then sending the unit. And actually, to James's point, that's rather too late in society by the time the issue has arisen. But there's one final point I wanted to land here, which is that all the concerns you may have about the police, all the things we may want to do about investigating them, the worst thing by miles that could have come out of this is putting the military on the streets in Britain as a result of this. Because the army is for fighting. The army is as an armed force designed to fight the king's enemies and to beat them into submission. Our police are a civil force equipped to the best that they can be and trained to the best that they can be to enforce the law in a civil function. We don't believe in putting military force on the street in this country, and we'd have very bad outcomes if we did. So I'm very glad the situation has calmed down.
I don't think they were. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure the plan was just to have them randomly patrolling. Wasn't it that they were there in the case of like an emergency scenario where they needed to be drafted in?
The very point about the case that has produced the situation is that not everything goes to plan in these situations.
Well, I'm a little bit harsh. I always say it's a good job for everyone, quite frankly. I'm not in charge of this country, but I would argue, actually, that in some cases, if people did see army soldiers patrolling the streets, they might think twice about some of the antics that they get up to. Anyway, I will leave you guys to have the final word and the final thoughts on that topic. I'll bring some of your responses in after the break as well, but I want to ask you about buy now, pay later. You're all familiar with this concept, apparently. About 1 in 8 of us have actually used these services, but do you support them? Are they exploitation of the poor, or are they just basically an essential service? Do we need to regulate it more? You tell me.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 alongside my PR consultant Alex Dean and the former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. Now, Chris, when we was talking about armed police officers, your email came in. We were talking about HS2 at the start of the programme, asking why, if you care so much about the North, why didn't you start the whole project in the North rather than starting it down south? Chris, you did make me chuckle because you say, why didn't they start HS2 in the North, Michelle? Simple, because who on earth wants to get to Hull faster. For me, quite frankly. And anyway, I think what we're talking about is the whole kind of east to west piece rather than north to south. Patricia says, Michelle, what's going on? How does one pronounce the letter H? Is it H or is it H? Please advise, right? Patricia, I shall let you into a little secret. When you're from Hull, we drop the letter, well, you would say H. And then, because we try to make ourselves sound a little bit more, I don't know, we call it a telephone voice. So instead of saying I'm from Hull, which is how we would say it, we say I'm from Hull, which then leads to that overpronunciation of the letter H. So then it becomes H. Are you any clearer? No? Shall I move on? Also, Amanda says, can I say James is a breath of fresh air? We need more like him to represent the left side of the debate. He's so balanced and reasoned in his arguments, and he comes armed with facts.
Wow.
Have you been paying our viewers to get in touch with compliments?
Well, I couldn't possibly comment.
Well, there you go. Keep your thoughts coming in. But I want to talk to you now about a very serious issue, actually. You know, buy now, pay later, because apparently nearly 3 million households owe £2.7 billion when it comes to these deals. The Labour Party now are basically coming out talking tough, saying that we need to regulate this industry a lot more when it comes to things like credit checks and all the rest of it. Well, regulating this industry has been going on for a long time, and there's been a lot of consultations about it as well, and nothing really has happened. Do you agree now that it is time to get a hold of these things, do things like your credit checks and all the rest of it?
Yes, I think it is. We do have a problem with problem lenders, and I think we can look at it that way around when we're talking about regulation. There are a lot of people that are in too much debt for how much money that they've got coming in. And so I think things like capping the maximum amount that you can pay back, so you can never pay back more than the principal that you pay, capping the interest rates that you are legally allowed to take people for monthly. To deal with the payday lending thing, it would be an important set of reforms and should be, that's the sort of regulation we need. Now, that doesn't mean stopping anybody from having a, buy now, pay later. For loads of people, that's absolutely fine. But for those who it isn't and would be adding to their debt pressures down the line, some regulation to stop problem lending would be a good thing.
You can't mean a rule that says you can't pay back more than the principal, because that would mean no interest at all.
Sorry, no, the interest not being, say, double the principal.
So some X of the principal.
Some X of the principal,
okay,
yeah.
Where do you stand in terms of credit checking?
Well, the businesses are entitled to run credit checks to make sure they're not going to lose money on things, but I don't think the government should pass a law that requires burdensome credit checks to be run in all cases, when, as James rightly says, the majority of people using these services do it because they want to and they enjoy it. I mean, let's put names to it so people know what we're talking about. It's things like Klarna or Pay Later with the number 8 in it. These services are used by millions of people, go cardless, people watching this show. Indeed, PayPal as a buy now, pay later provider in the UK. I mean, these are millions of people use it, and to your point, I didn't quite take in the figures that you were giving, but for millions of users, whatever it was, 2.7 billion or whatever.
I think it's about 1 in 8 adults.
Right, so 2.7 billion spread across the whole country, or 1 in 8 of us, is not very much money. And the point is that the vast majority of that will get cleared off month to month. The reason the businesses carry on is that the people then go out and take another one. And they do that because they want to. Let
me ask you this, right, because, yes, I know that a small percentage of these people, so like here it says, we're looking at some figures here, it says among the 19% who said that they'd use these services to pay for essentials, the items covered include groceries, toiletries, bills and fuel, whatever. So that's like less than 20% of the people, which means they're 80% there or thereabouts. These are not people that are poverty-stricken people that are trying to buy, I don't know, a sausage and mash for tea or whatever. It's people that are splurging, in some cases, on things that they perhaps don't need. And one of the things that I perhaps worry about is, you talk about things like Klarna and stuff like that. A lot of these services are now embedded at checkouts online. Yeah. So, like, when you go shopping, the sales are on, I'll have that dress, this dress, whatever, in the basket it goes. And then it's almost just like, it's like, I'll whip my card out, actually, no, I won't, I'll stick it on there. And it's now just in people's psyche. And it used to be, James, that you bought something once you'd saved up and you could afford it. And now it's the opposite way around. It's like, I don't need to save up, I can just get it now and get all the gratification now and then worry about the cost afterwards. I don't think that's a very healthy attitude.
Well, it depends, and we should be clear that some change to this isn't going to deal with the fact that there's a squeeze in people's living standards and too many people don't have enough to get by, and tweaking this around the edges isn't going to make a difference. And I think, but for plenty of people, the ability to buy now and pay later, so you don't have to save up for something, is one of the benefits of having a well-working financial system. But for some people, they can fall into really bad problems with it, which is why I think some kinds of reforms, like maximum interest rates, like you can only have to pay back a certain times the amount that you borrowed. So, if you borrow 100 quid to get through the week and you end up paying £1,000, clearly that's exploitative and that's bad and that shouldn't exist. But if you want to buy, I don't know, your iPad there and you want to pay it over 24 months of instalments rather than all in one go, I mean, that's absolutely fine. So I think we should bring in, this is a real issue, so policies should be brought in for it, but they should target what the real problem is, which is some people can be exploited, and effort should be put in place to prevent that.
No offence, Michelle, I'm not so worried about buy now, pay later. I'm more worried about you, because when you say people shouldn't do this financially...
A few people have told me that before.
They shouldn't do this financially, they shouldn't do that financially. You're entitled to your moral position, and indeed you're entitled to think that's good advice. But you shouldn't be in the business of telling other people what they can and can't do. And that tendency is far more worrying to me than what provision people get on buy now, pay later.
From Auntie Michelle would do people a lot of good.
Well, thank goodness you're not government, Michelle, would be the point. So I'm agreeing.
So to me, at least twice a program, I look my audience square in the eye and I always say, you are very lucky I'm not in charge of the country. You are, accept that. But no, actually, I think a lot more people in society do need to be told you shouldn't buy that because you haven't got the funds to buy it. If you choose to listen to me, then that's up to you. And if you choose to go, well, stuff here, I'm going to get what I want, that's also up to you.
But the point is, people are entitled to go into debt, knowingly and by choice. And indeed, in this country, we encourage millions of people to do it with the most important investment they ever make, which is their house.
True.
Right? So once we accept that that's a principle that people can do it, why can't they do it for a dress or for whatever it is? So, once you start going down this road of telling people what they can and can't do, very quickly the nanny state will tell us what you can and can't drink, what you can and can't smoke, what you should be doing with your leisure time, and that's... So you're entitled to your friendly advice, Michelle, as long as it stops there.
I think that's a big stretch, giving people, kind of financial advice, because one of the things I think at schools, I don't think they teach financial literacy.
Oh, I agree with that.
I don't think that a lot of kids, you say to people, if you want to buy your 10 dresses, buy it, don't listen to Michelle. But I would actually say that a lot of people don't really understand simple things like compound interest and things. They don't really know what they're getting into.
Buy it knowing that you're going to pay more in the end than you would have done if you'd paid up front. But you know what? The majority of people in this country who are either house owners or aspire to be willingly go into a situation where they pay tens of thousands of pounds more for the house that they get because they need a mortgage for it. And, if that's the predicate in which our system is built, it feels rather hollow in the end to get overly excited about buy now, pay later.
Yeah, but, what do you guys think to this at home? It's one thing stretching yourself and getting into debt for a home to live in, stretching yourself and getting into debt so that you can look like the latest Daft Kardashian or whatever it is. Again, free society, do what you want. Karen says, never mind buy now, pay later. You say, why aren't you looking at the rates that the banks are charging on some of their credit facilities, credit cards and all the rest of it? Jim says the problem with doing credit checks is that if you pass it, you won't need the buy now, pay later deal. It's only the people that can't afford those kind of things and that wouldn't pass the checks that actually need the money in the first place. Alex says that these companies are parasites and they shouldn't be allowed to operate. It's the job of the government, Alex says, to protect its citizens from such exploitation.
Yes,
Studio Alex will agree
the
with
state
that.
is your mother and your father. There was one point there that I thought was interesting, though. So let's make a comparison. I don't object. I support the policy of tuition fees. I don't think the people who don't go to university should have to subsidise quite so heavily those who do. And I don't object to student loans. What I objected to in the student loan environment was the rate they whacked on the book. I thought that was unfair. I don't object to people entering into buy now, pay later. What I object to is some of the interests that are imposed and people's lack of understanding about what they're signing up to.
Well, there you go. Good advice there from Alex. Let's take a little look, shall we, at the weather.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Today's showers ease overnight, clear spells to come, but further rain arrives during Tuesday. Some of that, once again, will be heavy with a strong breeze, but nothing compared to Agnes. Storm Agnes, named by the Met Office because of the risk of widespread disruption into Wednesday as that arrives. Before that, it will be a breezy night, but nothing out the ordinary, some clear spells, and the lightest winds will be towards the east and south of England. That's where we'll see some mist patches form by dawn. But patchy cloud elsewhere, and that breeze will keep temperatures in the double figures in many spots. First thing, we've got some showers moving into central southern England. They push into the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast by mid-morning. Perhaps the odd rumble of thunder associated with these. We've got a spell of more persistent rain moving through Northern Ireland into much of Scotland. To the south of that, showers into Wales and the southwest, but in between the showers, some sunshine, and the sun comes out once again in the southeast with temperatures here of 23 Celsius. Average temperatures towards the northwest, where it will stay windy with the risk of gales in the far north. Those winds ease by the start of Wednesday with some early morning sunshine for many. But Storm Agnes is winding itself up in the Atlantic, and that's going to bring a spell of wet and windy weather during Wednesday afternoon and evening. Risk of widespread gales, especially around Irish Sea coasts, where there's the chance of significant disruption on Wednesday afternoon and evening.
That warm feeling inside. From boxed boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
There you go. I hope it's nice weather where you are. I can't decide what to wear these days. Am I in autumn clothes? Am I back in summer clothes? What is going on? Nina says, can someone tell Michelle she should not be telling people what they can and can't do? It's just arrogance, and it's not her business what people do with their money. Well, there you go. That told me, you know what? You pay some people for financial advice. I'm giving it to you for free. Anyway, you do with your money what you want. There's a lot coming your way. Don't go anywhere. I want to talk to you about Lampedusa. Do you know what that is? It is an island off Italy. And I can tell you what is going on there is absolutely eye-watering. I also want to talk to you about inheritance tax. See you in 2.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. PR consultant Alex Dean and the former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider, is alongside you. I've upset you all tonight. Everyone's agreeing with you. Dawn saying that she uses PayPal and things quite a few times to replace household items, etc. What has it got to do with you, Michelle? What I do with my money? You know what? I'm never going to mention it ever again. Do what you want with your cash. Go do what you want. I don't care. I don't know. Buy me a new dress if you're into all your shopping. Buy more, whatever. Claire says, I was brought up that if you can't afford something, you don't have it. And that's why I still like cash, and I believe that more people should use cash. Darren says, buy now, pay later is great, but the key is pay the balance off when it is due. And if not, you can get yourself into trouble. Don't start telling people financial advice, Darren, they'll have you. Anyway, let's talk about Lampedusa, shall we? It is, in case you're not familiar with it, and who would be, by the way, perhaps until recently, it's a small island off the coast of Sicily. I think, actually, I've got a little map that I can bring up on the screen and just show you, just to give you a little bit more context. There you go, everybody. Anyway, 11,000 migrants have landed on their shores in the past week alone. Mark White is actually there and joins me live now. Good evening to you, Mark White. Bring us up to speed briefly on what has been going on in the last kind of few days or so over there.
Well, this island with a population of 6,000 permanent residents has found itself overwhelmed by that surge in migrant numbers who are arriving here in recent weeks. It has been, as you said, 11,000 just in the past 10 days, but actually 62,000 have arrived here since the 1st of June. And across other islands and on the Italian mainland, those who've crossed from the Mediterranean total so far 130,000. Italy says that by the end of the year they expect the number of migrants to have crossed the Mediterranean into Italy to be 200,000. They are dealing with a very significant issue, but they are also in dispute with a number of European countries in terms of burden sharing and whether France and Germany will actually reverse its current policy of not taking those arriving in the likes of Lampedusa.
Yeah, I was literally just about to ask you about the EU response, because there is a bit of criticism here about whether or not these people should be widely distributed, if you like, not just within the EU, but beyond. How do you think that will actually end?
Well, it is the European Union's goal to have a proper burden-sharing process in place so that each of the countries take a share of those who are arriving into the European Union. But it's just not working out as planned. There are certain countries that just don't want to take a certain share of migrants, others who believe that actually because of their geographical position, likes of Italy, Greece and Spain, that they have many migrants who land on their shores and they want other countries in Europe to burden share better. It's all a bit of a headache for the European Union, and it's also testing the likes of the Schengen agreement, which of course allows free travel across European Union borders. But in some countries it's far from free at the moment. You've got France now putting on border checks between Italy and France to stop to stop those migrants who are getting into Italy proper, then from crossing into France. You've got Austria putting up border checks as well, Germany too. So it is a significant issue going forward, what the European Union does really to try to ensure that both Schengen and the burden sharing agreement works properly, because at the moment it certainly isn't.
And just very brief final question to you. You're there, you're on the ground. What do the locals make to all this?
Well, I mean, there are some that, you know, have sympathy for those that are crossing from often wretched conditions in their own countries. But many people here, I think, are very concerned at the huge surge on such a small island and their ability to cope with that. And, you know, viewers in the UK might be watching and really saying, why is this something we should care about? But actually it is, because history tells us that those that arrive on Europe's southern borders or eastern borders, or whichever route they take into Europe, often then find themselves heading to the northwest shores of France with a view to trying to get across the English Channel to the UK. So it affects all of Europe, and it certainly affects the UK as well.
Interesting stuff. That's Mark White there, live from Lampedusa. I mean, I hear all that and all these travels that people are going on. I can't understand how on earth they're financing all of this, all of these different stops, because they're not staying put in one place. They're paying a lot of people, I suspect, to take them a lot of different places. But anyway, what do you make to it all?
Well, this has been an issue for the Italians for more than a decade, and as your map helpfully reminded us, the little dot that was south of Sicily on your map is Malta. So Lampedusa is
I might bring the map back up while we're talking about
well to the southwest of Malta. You know, it's very close to the Tunisian, much closer to the Tunisian coast than the rest of Italy. But nevertheless, it's part of Italy. And once you're there, you are in Italy. And the big problem for the Italians, you know, 10,000 in 10 days, population of Lampedusa is something like 6,000, 6,500, right? So you're talking about culture changing, huge numbers of people in one go. The people who've been most disappointed at the current time, apart from those who live on Lampedusa itself, will be those who voted for Giorgia Meloni, because she said that she was going to change all of this when she came into office, and quite plainly, she hasn't.
And she's also talking tough. She says, and I quote, that what's going on there is an act of war, and she also calls it an invasion. Is language like that helpful?
No, not at all. And, you know, saying that this is a war and an invasion, all of that doesn't do anything to deal with the fact that there are people that are fleeing the conditions in which they are living. And the answer is, as Mark White was just saying, more cooperation between the EU states in order to take a process which is currently out of control and unmanaged and dangerous for many of the people taking part in it, to one which has more coordination and more management and more control, and therefore it can be more humane.
What does the coordination take you to in the end if it just means that lots of European countries, some of whom have already said they're not willing to take any, like Hungary or Poland, you know, it just mean taking more migrants and moving them around? Because in the end, that encourages more people to come via the deeply dangerous routes that Michelle's been talking about.
Well, it depends how you do it, and I also think that the policies should be put in place to make places that are currently people are forced to flee from not have to flee from. So, you know, we shouldn't go around invading, bombing Libya, for example, like we did 10 years ago, because that's hardly helped. And yes, there do need to be safe routes from big transit hubs in Tunisia and Libya and so on, and to bring some management of the system under control. Now, for the EU, that's going to be extremely difficult, because as we're seeing, the rise of these tough-talking, no-doing leaders like Giorgia Meloni, who will scapegoat, but they can't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say as well, you tell me what you think to that language, because there will be some people watching that just see the kind of hordes of boats there. You hear numbers like 11,000 in a week when the starting population was only 6. You got pretty much double that coming over on top of those numbers in the space of a week. Some people watching that will say, actually, they do think that language is accurate, and they would praise people for using that language. But again, it divides opinions. Where are you on that? And inheritance tax after the break. Should we scrap it? You, tell me.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. Lots of you guys getting in touch about the situation in Lampedusa. John saying that these countries have to draw a line somewhere as to how many people you can accept. For many countries, though, he says at that point has long been past. Well, that's what we're talking about. There's quite a row brewing at the moment as to where these people go and who should take how many. One of my viewers said lots of those people will be en route to the UK and will be here by Christmas. Keep your thoughts coming in. But I want to talk to you about inheritance tax now. This is an issue, isn't it, which does divide a lot of people. And I wonder, where do you sit on it at home? Because we do go around these houses quite a lot of time, and we seem to do a lot of talking about inheritance tax, but actually I think it's only about 4% there or thereabouts, give or take, of the estates that will actually pay it. It's a lot of money, 40%. Where do you stand on it?
So it definitely shouldn't be scrapped, but I would reform it because I think it clearly has a communication problem. There's something like 31% of people think that they're going to be impacted by it, but yet it only affects less than 4% of estates. So the change that I would make is exempting the family home up to a certain value, just levy
What value?
Sorry?
What value?
I'm not sure, we can debate that, but up to a certain, a high value, up to a high, 2 million or something, a big, a high value. And
2 million?
Well, hold on, wait, and then tax the recipient in the same way they'd be taxed their income tax. So you're not taxing the estate, you're taxing the recipient of the, of the gift from the estate. And that should be a reform which doesn't reduce the amount of money that's taken in. So I think it's a bit laughable that Rishi Sunak can do a tax cut that might save his family something like 300 million quid. Seems really not the right priority. If you wanted to do a tax cut that would benefit most people, you should look at, cutting the basic rate of income tax or VAT or something like that, which would help the overwhelming majority of people, not something which, as you said, impacts fewer than 4%.
Alex?
I'm in favour of all of the tax cuts that James just mentioned, and I'd like some more as well. I think that inheritance tax is wrong in principle. It's a tax on thrift, it's a tax on saving, it's a tax on attempting to provide for your children's future, and it's a tax on income which you've already paid tax. And if you've bought something like a house, you paid tax on your income, then you pay tax in stamp duty when you buy the house, and then it's taxed a third time when you have the rudeness of dying. It's a tax on death. And finally, it's a tax when you try and pass something on rather than splurge and spend it on yourself. It's a tax on your love of your children and your desire to provide for their future. I don't care if it applies to one person, let alone 4% of the population. It's wrong in principle.
I think it was a Tory, but I might have got that wrong. I heard it in passing in an interview this morning. She was saying it was a basic human instinct to want to pass on your property.
Correct.
Is it? Oh, do you know who it was that said that?
I don't know, but that's completely true.
Hearing it.
So let's separate out very different types of things. So, most people sitting at home thinking, in the emotive language that Alex was
rightly used,
very, very effectively. They're thinking, I've worked hard, I've saved, I've got a normal house, I've got a little bit of money here, and they actually fall underneath the threshold. What we're talking about here is a tax that should be applied to, for example, the Duke of Wellington when he inherits billions and billions. That's not the thrift of his forefathers who have been encouraged with savings and they've worked hard and it's their family home and blah, blah, blah. And you can obviously design a tax which deals with the massive amount of unnecessarily inherited large wealth that doesn't in any way impact the overwhelming majority of people. So I don't want to see inheritance tax scrapped. I would reform it in the way that I suggested, so it's less about taxing estates when people die and more about taxing large gifts that people receive.
Yeah, just to give you some context here, the average house price in this country is apparently £288,000, and the threshold for inheritance tax is your $325,000. You do get an extra, I think it's $175,000 for your home if you're then giving it to your kids, and of course if you're a married couple, you can sandwich that amount. And actually, so therefore most family homes, there you go, I've got it up on screen, and most family homes therefore will be exempt. What happens, as we've just been touching upon, is it's the very, very wealthy people that have all of these different structures in place that can stick their assets wherever.
Why don't you try context the other way around? The majority of detached homes in this country would be above the threshold that you've set out, and many couples don't have the foresight to plan their deaths conveniently for tax purposes. So quite often you get double death duty quite quickly in a row, where very often one partner dies very quickly after the death of their lifelong partner. In the end, this is when you start thinking about these things, it's just a tax on families trying to provide for one another. James was saying I was using rhetoric. Well, the rhetoric that he used very reasonably is the kind of thing that saw the destruction of all of the great families in England after the Second World War, introduced on reasonable terms and then used punitive taxes to ensure that a whole swathe of very nice houses are now run by the National Trust.
What's wrong with the National Trust?
Well, there you open up a whole different set of discussions about their position on transgender rights and slave archaeology.
The basic principle that some of our shared inheritance, big country houses or whatever, that we can go and walk around their gardens and walk around. I meant that precisely the same rhetoric that you used, which sounded very reasonable, was effectively used to destroy an entire class of private wealth in Great Britain. And you keep at it, and you'll have another one.
Well, there you go. That is an interesting question. What's wrong with the National Trust? I think we'll have that conversation perhaps another day. Time flies, doesn't it, when you are having fun? But for now, that's all I've got time for. Don't go anywhere. Richard Tice is in for Nigel Farage. But gents, for now, thank you. Have a good night.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Today's showers ease overnight, clear spells to come, but further rain arrives during Tuesday. Some of that, once again, will be heavy with a strong breeze, but nothing compared to Agnes. Storm Agnes, named by the Met Office because of the risk of widespread disruption into Wednesday as that arrives. Before that, it will be a breezy night, but nothing out the ordinary. Some clear spells, and the lightest winds will be towards the east and south of England. That's where we'll see some mist patches form by dawn. But patchy cloud elsewhere, and that breeze will keep temperatures in the double figures in many spots. First thing, we've got some showers moving into central southern England. They push into the Midlands, East Anglia and the